Really good to be with you. We are continuing in our series, Motive Matters, talking about the things that are going on inside of us, in our hearts and in our minds, and not just what's going on out here, that we are transformed from the inside out, and that's what God desires. Not just outward performance, but that what goes on in the heart actually matters, and it dictates and directs our lives. And so as we continue in the book of Micah, I want you to consider just a question. Have you ever trusted someone deeply and, man, you put all your cards in the basket and they failed you? Like they truly dropped the ball. Like whether it was a close friend or a family member, somebody that you trusted, somebody who's in leadership over you, well, whatever that looked like, you were like, man, I trust this person with my life, and then they disappointed you. They dropped the ball. And there's this feeling of like, if they're actually close to you, if you just stay with me for just a moment, if they're actually close to you when that happens, it's not just painful, it doesn't just sting, like the ground beneath you feels very unsettling. It almost feels like you're losing hope. Because the one person or the few people that you thought, man, would never fail you, they did. And you're left questioning, can I trust anybody? Like, where does this put me? I don't know how to navigate this feeling, this pain, this situation, whatever it is. That's much like Micah. Micah is experiencing heartbreak in so many ways. He's actually, in the text today, we're in Micah 7, 1 through 7. What he's experiencing is he's looking out at the landscape, all of society, both the southern and the northern kingdom, God's people. He's looking out at society. He's going, no one. I can't trust anyone. No one is found faithful. As a matter of fact, they're fighting among one another, and it is a hot mess. But what's interesting is at the end of the passage, Micah makes a choice. Do you know what his choice is? He's like, everything that's going on, I'm going to trust, I'm going to look to God. And so that's our focus today. People may fail you, but God never will. Systems may fail you, but God never will. You may fail you, but God never will. That's the direction that we're headed. That's where we're going. And so I want you to reflect on this just for a moment before we jump into the text. Who or what are you placing your trust in? Just think about that. There is a God who is sovereign and good, and he loves you, and he's for you, and he will never leave you. Who are you placing your trust in? In people, systems, your own strength, or are you turning to God who never fails? So let's jump in. This is Micah chapter 7, verse 1. This is, I don't know how else to say it because of the translation that we're using. Micah sounds very melodramatic right now, okay? So I'm just going to go ahead and say that out the gate, but it's real. So he says, how sad for me, for I am like one when the summer fruit has been gathered after the gleaning of the grape harvest finds no grape cluster to eat, no early fig, which I crave. He's saying there's an empty harvest. Like I'm looking out all of humanity that I can see, all of the people of God, all of the covenant community, I'm looking out, there's no fruit. It's broken. It's fallen. Everything is a mess. That's what he feels like. That's what he senses. And so he's going, man, I don't know how to process this, but here's the thing. I crave for godly people. I long for people who would follow Yahweh. I long for people who would actually be faithful to the covenant. Because as I look at the covenant people, all of them are broken. All of them for years, decades, hundreds of years are walking away from Yahweh. And that's his declaration. That's what he's seeing. That's what he's feeling. He's heartbroken. That's the picture. It's an imagery of spiritual deadness, of apathy. Remember the context. Their society, their community, economically, up and to the right. They're killing it, they're crushing it, things are going good. Promotions, all the things. But he's saying your spiritual life is a wreck. You're dead spiritually. So I just want to pause for a moment, and I want you to consider, like, what about your life? Think about it. Like, does your life feel this way? Does your life represent spiritual deadness? Do you have apathy? What's your relationship with God been like? How's it been the last months, years in your life? Do you feel this way? Like there's no fruit that's blossoming? There's no fruit when it comes to your relationships. There's no fruit when it comes to your hope. There's no fruit when it comes to your peace. You're anxious and wrecked and fearful and constantly combating everything in your life. Just think about your life for a moment. What about spiritually? Do you feel alive? The passage here, remember last week we talked about covenant curses, that God made a relationship with a certain people. He called them into a covenant with him. And he said, if you break your covenant with me, and there's going to be curses. Really what you're going to do is you're going to sow you're going to reap what you sow. So if you sow in evil and rebellion and not following Yahweh, you are going to reap destruction and lacking peace and not having hope and broken systems and broken lives and broken everything in your life. But what we see here in this passage, he's talking about there's no fruit. It's the opposite of what a covenant blessing could look like. That you would be and have a life that is full of fruit and joy and peace in the midst of everything. It's much like, I'm going to give you a positive example. A few weeks ago, I shared the gospel in service. There was a guy who showed up. It was his second week, and he gave his life to Jesus. And I saw him afterwards. We kind of connected, and I was like, how are things going, man? And he goes, you don't even know this about my story, but I have an addiction problem. And I finally told my wife about it. And it caused all this conflict. And so I came to church. I heard the gospel. I gave my life to Jesus. And I was like, that's amazing. And I go, how's it going now? And he goes, man, I'm all in. Jesus has changed my life. I have hope. I believe that I have a future. I have a purpose. And he said, what's crazy, Clint, is we don't even live in this area. And we actually live in Apopka, and so we found a local church where we are, and we joined it. We just got baptized. My wife came to Christ as well, so his whole household came to Christ, and we both got baptized recently, and we're serving in the church. We're so excited about what God's doing. We're getting into a group. Like, he is on fire. He goes, as a matter of fact, Clint, we're giving to your church. So I was like, come on. That's awesome. Thank you. Like, appreciate it. And he's just like, God is working in my life. That is what fruit looks like. Somebody who's connected to Jesus and saying, I'm all in, whatever you want me to do and wherever you want me to go, I'm in. What about you? Are you bearing fruit? Or is this spiritual deadness? Is there this apathy in your life? Let's keep going. Again, I want to bring the context. Micah's looking over the landscape and he's saying, empty harvest. It's broken. And he's going to go into it even more. Look at verse 2. Faithful people. I'm going to go ahead and define that. Faithful people in this context is those who have covenant love. Those who are faithful to Yahweh. Faithful to their love for God Almighty himself. He says, faithful people have vanished from the land. There is no one upright among the people. All of them wait in ambush to shed blood. They hunt each other with a net. Micah the prophet is mourning, this funeral almost lament. And he's looking over all the people and he's saying, in the southern kingdom, in the northern kingdom, all of God's people are broken. No one is found faithful. Now, this is Micah's perspective. We haven't heard Yahweh's. We don't know what Yahweh's perspective is at this point. It's not like Elijah, the prophet in the Old Testament, where Elijah comes and he's like, man, there's no one faithful. I'm the only faithful one. And God goes, actually, there's 7,000 people over here. You just don't know it. I'm a God who is above and I can see all things and know all things. But Micah is sitting here going, I can't see anyone. No one is found faithful. All have vanished from the land. No one is upright, but I want you to notice the phrase right before this verse. He says, the land is barren, and then he says, nobody's found faithful. Right in the middle, you know what he says? This thing I crave, though. What does he crave? He craves righteous people. Notice his heart in all of this. He's brokenhearted. He's looking at everyone and going, I can't trust anybody. Everybody's broken. But what does he say? But I crave those who follow Yahweh. It's easy in a broken system with broken people to really want to judge people and hate on people and bring them down. That's not Micah's heart. What's the motive of his heart? His motive is, man, I wish that these people would follow Yahweh. I'm coming them, I'm warning them, I'm asking them, I'm pleading with them, follow Yahweh. Don't go on your own devices. Don't think you've got it figured out. You don't. You need God. You need God in your life. So his heart is, man, I love you. I'm for you. I want you to change. I want to see a difference. I'm bringing judgment, but not for the hope of bringing judgment, for the hope that you would turn around and follow God. That's what he's longing for. So he's in this midst of all these people, and he's going, I find no one. Have you ever felt alone? Think about it. In your walk with the Lord, have you ever felt loneliness? Like, what about you students? You go to school, you show up, you're trying to follow God. You're like, God, I love you. I want to show up today. I want to represent you. And then as you hang out with people, you're like, man, does anybody feel the same thing that I feel? Does anybody want to follow Jesus? Because whenever I get into a conversation with them, they throw me under the bus. They backstab me. And when I confront them, they're saying they follow Jesus, but then when I actually talk to them about it, they're like, I don't know what you're talking about, man, leave me alone. And you're just like, what is happening? People that you trusted, friends that you've been like were looking to, your sports friends who, man, you showed up and they're talking about you behind your back and you feel like, is anybody faithful? Do I have any real friends? Does anybody really trust God? And you feel alone in it. Micah understands. This is his perspective. He's literally looking out and he's going, the people that I grew up with, the friends that I had, the family members that I have, no one is found faithful. Think about your job. Maybe you're in a work context where you're just sitting there and you're trying to follow Jesus and you feel alone. You feel like you're trying to carry everything on your own. And you're going, does anybody love Jesus? You can feel like that at times, right? Maybe it's not. Maybe it's your friend group. Maybe it's people in your family where you just feel alone. But over and over, what's the picture? The picture in the Old Testament is that God's people would be faithful to Yahweh, that they would even be a light. And so he's saying, man, I can't find anyone. There is no one upright among my people. The question is, what does that mean? What does it look like to be upright? It's one who keeps covenant, one who obeys God, one who loves God with all their heart, mind, soul, and strength. Deuteronomy 6, one who would train their kids to follow God. That's the picture. And so I just want you to pause for a moment. Christians, if you're in the room, you are in the room. I didn't mean it that way. So Christians are God's people. Your call is the same, both salt and light, Matthew 5, right? So here's something for you to reflect on. Are you different? Are you set apart? Do you love God first and most? Just think about that. Let that sit in. Let it process. Do you raise your kids in the way of the Lord? What's interesting is the New Testament expresses people who follow Jesus this way. Acts 2. What do? They are generous. They are kind. They gather together. They worship together. They serve together. They live life together. They represent an actual community, an actual body of Christ locally. Not online, not people that you don't know, people who you live life with. That's what the community of God looks like. People who trust each other, who confess their sins, who say, man, that was me, I messed up, I'm sorry, we're gonna work through this, and we're gonna trust God all the way. That's what it looks like. So my question is, if the prophet today came looking, would he find you faithful? Would he say, yes, yes, yes? Or would he look over the landscape and go, there's no one, there's no one? And when I think about this text, like look at it, he says, All of them wait in ambush to shed blood. They hunt each other with a net. It's like Hunger Games. I mean, it's like all of the people, notice the transition, the shift in Micah. Micah all throughout, what does he do? He talks to the people about idolatry, that they are becoming like the other nations. Did you notice the shift here? What's the judgment? What's the struggle? It's not just idolatry. They're fighting among one another. The covenant community of God, the people of God are fighting each other. They're shedding blood. They are getting after each other. So what does a godly, faithful person look like? It's a person who chooses their battles, who stands for truth at the right times, right? Not looking for a fight. Again, people may fail you, but God never will. So let's keep going. Verse 3, he's going to continue to talk about the society that he lives in. Remember the empty harvest? Then all of a sudden he looks out and there's no one there. No one is faithful. Now what does he say about them? He says, both hands are good at accomplishing evil. The official and the judge, they demand a bribe. When the powerful man communicates his evil desire, they plot it together. All right, right out of the gate, how many of you are Princess Bride fans? You don't have to, I want to hear a shout, like, are you a true fan or not? So, all right, so here, I'm going to ask it in a different way. Is there anybody in here that has not seen The Princess Bride? I love it that y'all actually raise your hand. Like, I'm not trying to shame you, but it was like 3 or 4 people last service, and it was like 2 in this one. Can y'all just agree with me? They should watch that movie. Absolutely. Okay, absolutely. Yeah. It's a great movie. It's fun. Some of my kids have even watched it with me. But what's the story? There's 2 people. They're young. They're in love. They separate, and this man in black comes to rescue his potential bride. And he has to go through different feats to reach her and to help her and to rescue her. One of the feats is he meets a man named Inigo Montoya. I can't do it. I'm sorry. I practiced it back there multiple times. I can't seal the deal, all right? But that's his name, okay? And they meet at the Cliffs of Insanity. That's what it is. And they are going to battle to a duel of swords, okay? And both of them, with one hand, are dueling each other, right? And it's like, wow, they can really fight. Like, they're really good at this. And then all of a sudden, middle of the fight, Inigo Montoya, I can't. What does he do? He switches from his left hand to his right hand. And it's his more proficient hand. And you're like, oh, snap, here we go. And then all of a sudden, the man in black, what does he do? He's been fighting with his left hand, and he switches hands, and they both go at it. And the fight is so much more intense. That's the picture here, okay? They had absolute mastery and skill. They were ambidextrous at evil. That's the picture. That the leaders of their time were so efficient and so successful at evil that it was like they were ambidextrous. They just had all this skill at it. Notice what it says. It talks about very specifically. It says there's a judge, an officer, and essentially a high capacity man who has all this leverage, who communicates to them. What does it say? It says that they plot together. So this is high up stuff, okay? And there's 3 individuals that are plotting together. The picture is this. They all have evil desires, and like a rope or like a braid, their evil desires intertwine. And they make this thing into this plot that is so successful. And so you've got these officials, these people who are high up, and they're doing things that are not good, that are evil. And he's saying, man, I look everywhere. Humanity itself, and it's broken. It's fallen. And what does he say, verse 4? He continues about them, and really about the whole. The best of them is like a briar. The most upright is worse than a hedge of thorns. The day of your watchman, the day of your punishment is coming. At this time, their panic is here. He's saying, man, I look at them. Even the best of them, it's bad. It's dark. It's troublesome. He is mourning. He's trying to get a grip on this. He's saying, these guys and these people are truly terrible human beings. Leaders, it's interesting, leaders are supposed to protect and not bring harm, right? That's what we see. That's what we would hope for. And here's the reality. Our leaders fail us as well. And so I just want you to think about, have you ever had a leader that brought more harm than good to you personally? I'm not saying far out somewhere. I'm saying to you personally. Here's the kicker. We're all leaders of some sort. We're all called to lead others to Jesus by the things that we say, by the way that we live, by the life that we have, right? Are there areas in your life that you are bringing more harm than good? Think about that. Think about the different categories, the different roles, the different places in your life. Whether you're a spouse, a parent, a boss, small group leader, mentor, leader at your school, whatever that looks like, you carry authority. You speak over people's lives. You carry authority in a way that others don't. Are you using your authority in appropriate ways? Think about that. What does he say? Let's continue the verse. He says, the day of your watchman, the day of your punishment is coming. At this time, their panic is here. So what is he saying? I look over the landscape, I look at the people of God, the covenant community of God, and it's a mess. Even the best ones are terrible. Like I can't find anything. And then he says there's a watchman. What is a watchman? There's some debate here. Most likely he's talking about a prophet who comes in and speaks direction and life much like Micah. Like, hey, you need to turn from your ways and turn to Yahweh. So he says a watchman, what does he do? He comes and he speaks and he says the day of your punishment is coming. It's something that's coming later. It's in the future, but he's speaking of it as if it exists now. Your punishment is coming like now, but it's going to happen in the future. And at this time, their panic is here. So here's the picture. The word panic, it literally means what you would think, but we're going to put it in context. Panic is confusion. So here's the judgment. Because you're not walking with Yahweh and you keep doing it, your panic, your confusion is going to overwhelm you. You are going to feel lost, purposeless, without hope. You're going to have fear and anxiety, and it's going to be a mess in your life. And that's the complete opposite of the covenant blessings of God. Think about in Corinthians when God says, I'm not a God of disorder, but of order. I'm a God of peace. I'm a God of joy and purpose and life. I'm giving you a direction that you can go in. You are not on your own. I haven't left you. You are not an orphan. I love you. I'm going to give you a new identity. I'm going to give you a new heart. I'm going to forgive you, set you free. I'm going to accept you. I'm going to do everything that you long for. That's what I'm going to do. Follow me. But he's saying because they're not walking with Yahweh, they're going to have panic. They're going to have confusion. It's going to be brokenness in their lives. And then look at the expression here, right as we go into verse 5. He almost portrays what confusion and craziness looks like. So it's happening, but it's only going to happen more. Verse 5, he says, do not rely on a friend. Don't trust in a close companion. Seal your mouth from the woman who lies in your arms. Surely a son considers his father a fool. A daughter opposes her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies are the men of his own household. What is he saying? Even those who are close are broken. Even those who are closest to you, you can't trust. There's no one to trust in these people. It's a hot mess. I'm going to say it to you this way. Don't let disappointment in people rob you of your trust in God. Don't let disappointment in people rob you of your trust in God. Micah's going to turn the corner for himself in just a moment. He's going to look up to the heavens. He's going to look up to the God who is in the midst of all the crazy. And he doesn't let people, all of them, because he says no one. Can you imagine? No one has been faithful. Does he let that rob him of his joy and his trust in Yahweh? Absolutely not. So what's the call for us? There are people in your lives who have hurt you and brought you pain and suffering, and you're left going, can I trust anyone? It gets really dangerous when you go from there to, can I trust God? This hurts. I feel lost. God, what are you doing? And I think about, I'm going to give you something really simple that I talk to my daughters about. So they'll come to me every so often and they'll say, hey, Dad, like, what do you do with this? Whether it's a natural disaster or a situation they heard about and it's really dark and evil and painful. And they'll come and they'll be like, Dad, what do you do with this? Like, God's supposed to be good. What's going on? And so I have this thing, and many of you have heard it, and it's simple. There's more to it, but just in a quick way for a young kid, like, I find it helpful, and they go, okay, like, I've got a vantage point. I've got, like, a foundation, and it's the meta-narrative of Scripture. It's creation, fall, restoration, redemption. And so what do we do with things that are hard and broken and sinful? I go, sweetheart, God created everything. It was beautiful and good. And then one day, humanity decided to rebel against God and his beautiful creation, his beautiful intentions, and the purposes that he has. And ever since that moment, sin entered the world. Death entered the world. Brokenness entered the world. Pain entered the world. Suffering entered the world. And it's continuing in all of humanity. But God said, I'm not going to leave you in your suffering, in your sin. I'm not going to leave you to die alone. I'm not going to leave you as an orphan. No. I'm going to redeem you. That's redemption. So creation, fall, redemption. I'm going to send my one and only son, God said. And his name is Jesus. And Jesus is going to live a perfect life, one that we could never even fathom living, one that is holy and pure and just and godly and righteous in its fullest sense. He's going to come and he's going to put his life in place of yours on a cross. His life is going to be sacrificed in place of our sin. He's going to receive the wrath of God, the judgment of God, the punishment that we deserve, our death, our brokenness, our sin, the sickness of the world, the death in the world, and he's going to consume it. He's going to, like a sponge, receive the wrath of God and rise on the third day from death. That whoever would trust in him, they can have hope and victory, and there's that word, redemption. They will be purchased out of a slavery to sin to a righteous life with him. They will be declared righteous because of Jesus. But not only that, talking to my girls, sweetheart, I know things are still broken. I know it's like, is God really still here though? It's still a mess. I know Jesus came, I know he died for my sins, but what about all the stuff that's going on now? Here's the thing. Jesus came fully and finally, but one day he's going to come again. And he's going to make everything right. So the fear that you have, the anxiety that you have, the I don't have perspective in whatever the scenario, natural disaster, somebody did something wrong to you, somebody truly committed an atrocious thing, he's going to come back and he's going to fix that. There is hope. There's hope. Micah didn't have Jesus. Micah didn't have the cross, but he believed in a God who would restore, who would redeem, who was over all things, Yahweh himself. That's the picture. And so I just want you to think about in your own life, are you struggling with God not because he failed you, but because someone else has? How many of you, man, because of church hurt, this goes with the church as well. It's not just God, but like the church hurt you or a leader hurt you or someone in your life hurts you at another church. You left and then you're showing up today and you're going, I don't know. Remember, people may fail you, but God never will. It's not God who failed you. It's humanity. It's sin. It's brokenness. Believe that. Walk in that truth. Don't let disappointment in people rob you of your trust in God, right? Let's keep going. Verse 7, this is where everything turns, right? Micah's going, man, humanity is broken. Society is broken. And then what does he do? Does he wallow, tuck tail, and head out? What does he do? Verse 7, but I, Micah the prophet, will look to the Lord. I will wait for the God of my salvation. My God will hear me. I'm going to say it a different way. God's faithfulness shines brightest in our darkest moments. I know many of you have experienced that. God's faithfulness shines brightest in our darkest moments. He's saying, I'm not going to rely on men. I'm not going to rely on anybody. I'm going to rely on the Lord. He's going to guide me. He's going to direct me. He's going to give me the hope that I need. And eventually, Micah doesn't know this, but God's going to send Jesus. Praise be to God that he sent Jesus to save us. So Micah looks around, he sees nothing but betrayal and disappointment and brokenness, family members fighting and infighting and all the things. And what does he say? But as for me, I will look to the Lord. I will wait for the God of my salvation. My God will hear me. Micah makes a choice. He chooses that in the midst of his pain and sorrow and mourning, that God is real, that God is good, and that he can look up and have hope. He can look up and glean that God will never leave me. And so whether it's a broken relationship, unmet expectations, or even the disappointment you might feel about yourself, your own brokenness, remember, God remains steadfast. He's always faithful, always listening, and always ready to restore. So as we close, we're going to do confession and communion. But before we get there, I want to give you some things to reflect on, to think through. So think about this. Where are you placing your trust? Are you relying on people to fill the void that only God can truly satisfy? Today, listen, God is inviting you to make a shift. And it's from trusting in people, trusting in other things. And he's saying, I want you to shift and I want you to actually trust in God. People are going to fail you, but God never will. And so I'm going to pray and then we'll take a time of confession. We'll receive communion. Father, we are grateful for your Son. I just pray that as people are processing who they trust and how people have brought disappointment and pain, maybe even shame into their lives, God, that you would be able to help us all turn the corner from trusting ultimately in people and things to trusting ultimately in you. And God, that as we confess, God, that maybe we need to confess sins in our lives where we've trusted in others and they've dropped the ball and we've taken it out on you. We've walked away from you. We've not sought you. We've sought in ourselves and protected ourselves only to find hopelessness and fear and anxiety. God, we just confess to you, and we're going to take a moment right now, God, to come to you and to get right and to say, I'm not going to trust in myself or others ultimately. I'm going to trust in you.